Hi, I'm Aidan Brown, and this is the Main Stage podcast, and we are joined here today by Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist, and a very sought-after South African. He knows a lot about a lot of things, but particularly obviously economics and the socio-political landscape as well. He seems to be very well informed. Welcome to the show, Dawie.
Thank you very much for the invite. Nice being here.
It's amazing to have you because I've been following you for quite a long time, and I must say you are one of the more accessible public intellectuals, and there's a lot of people that really appreciate people like you that kind of stick their necks out and do speak up on current affairs issues. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure, thanks.
We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to hop straight into it. South Africa has this very odd obsession, I would say, to some extent, with Marxism. The ANC was obviously ideologically aligned to Marxism historically. They had, during the apartheid era, support from socialist, Marxist places like Ukraine and Russia, as it was at that stage, not necessarily now. And this seems to have not ever gone away. And one thing I've never encountered in all my years in different universities is an economist, a real economist, somebody that's actually got a degree or formal experience in economics, that's also a Marxist. Can you explain this gap to me? Why don't we walk around finding PhDs and master's degrees and honors degree students in economics that are also running around with red berets and green berets?
Actually, there are a couple.
I'm surprised.
No, I've met a few.
Okay.
I've met a few professors even that call themselves Marxists or communists and so on. And yes, now I've met a couple. I've formally studied communism, and I think it's a really, really interesting ideology. I'm very much interested in the various ideologies. I'm also very much interested in religions, because that's nothing but an ideology, basically.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. The ANC got stuck somewhere in the 1920s in terms of the ideology. And you can see that in the policies of the ANC as well. I mean, they tried to centralize everything. And here's a bit of an irony, actually. Because as we understand socialism or communism, is that it's under control of somebody in the center. It's very important to centralize the power. But actually, that's not what Karl Marx had in mind. The word Soviet, for example, Soviet Union, means local authority. So the idea is to have the power really close to the people. That was the original idea. But anyway, so there's interesting other things, that the theory behind the communism. Communism, you can actually find the roots of communism back in the Greek philosophers. They were the first real communist, I would say, but it was certainly Karl Marx that formalized this ideology called communism. But to come back to your question, yes, there are a couple of professors in economics that call themselves communists, and there's actually quite a strong communist intellectia out there, trying to make it more fashionable again, to communism, to bring it back again in a way. But it has been proved to be completely and totally unsuccessful in practice, and there are very good reasons for that. And maybe we can chat about that.
I've come across Hegelian Marxists, which are essentially, for me, they're Marxists who are just a little bit more honest, and they say we can't find a mathematical solution for certain problems within communism. Which I find kind of ironic, because I also see those same patterns in capitalism, which is for me an accumulation of numbers, where you have more and more wealth accumulating in fewer and fewer people all the time. So I've seen that in both communism and capitalism. But the Hegelian Marxists are the closest that I can come, because there's a very difficult. It's quite tricky to reconcile modern economics with Marxism.
In a way, no. Can I just you've got two ideologies that you're referring to: Marxism,
yes,
and the other one you call capitalism.
Yes.
I would rather give it different names. I don't like the word capitalism.
Okay.
The word capital or capitalist was first used by Karl Marx, by the way. I prefer to call it a free system. Individual freedom, because I mean it's not about economics only, it's about all sort of other things as well. And the other system, I would prefer to call it a centrally controlled system, or maybe a more regulated system, or
a central command system versus a free market.
kind of thing. Yeah, those are the differences between the two. And it is not only about economics, it's not about numbers, it is really about individual freedom. To what extent are people allowed to be free, or to what extent you want to limit people's freedoms? And that's actually the philosophical question behind that. From an economic point of view, the various economic systems, like the free system or a more centrally controlled system, the question behind that is, how do you allocate resources? That is basically the fundamental question. Even communists, you talk about communists or you talk about free market lovers or libertarians or whatever you want to call them, we've got one thing that we all want, and that is people to be better off, or at least that's what we say. We economists say left or right. We follow my ideas, because if we do this, people will be better off. But they will be wealthier, or they will live better, or they will have better access to medicine or health services or education, whatever you want to call it. But people will be better off if you follow my system. So that is the difference between the various systems. And in the case of the Marx or the communists, they reckon that if you centralize things, and you centralize assets, and everything belongs to everybody, then you won't get exploitation. And that's the basis of Karl Marx's theory. He was a Marxist, and he formalized communism, but there are subtle differences between these various schools of thought. The basis of Karl Marx's thought was basically that the capitalists, the bad guys, will accumulate capital, and the only way that they can accumulate capital is by exploiting the labor, or by exploiting labor. And Karl Marx said that the way to prevent this is to make sure that capital remains under control of the people. The problem with that is that if everything belongs to everybody, nothing belongs to anybody. That is the basic problem with communism, basically, in the end.
Yeah, the communism, there's a huge slowing down, for example, of innovation, because people aren't as incentivized to compete amongst each other in a free market to make more innovative products. So the idea was, we're going to centralize all the resources. For example, the Russians are going to centralize all the resources in this one area so that we can make the best, most efficient product. But without the free market competition, there was a limit in the flow of ideas.
There's much more to that than only that. Maybe I can just step back for a moment and try to explain what I mean by that. So I said, coming back to your original, well, you make the comment that it's more innovative, a free market kind of system, and that is indeed so. But maybe we can just talk a little bit about what is called scientific communism and how the thing works. Yes. And in a way, you made a comment earlier. I think today, real pure communism is more possible than 100 years ago, and that is because of artificial intelligence. But let me just explain what I mean by that. So there's at least a Soviet version of communism, the Soviet Union, and I've been there a couple of times, and I'm very interested in the various ideologies, like I've said. So the question is, how do you optimally allocate resources? Because the resources in the economy is a scarce thing. Things like, for example, capital is scarce, or things like gold is scarce, oil is scarce, labor, all those sort of things. Everything is scarce. How do you allocate it in such a way that make people better off? And the communists, what they did, the scientific communism, is that they started from the individual. How many calories do you need to survive per day? You need 1,500 or 2,000 calories per day. So typically, if you've got a family of, say, four people living in a flat, for example, how much heat do you need in order to stay warm during winter? How much are you going to eat? How much clothes do you need? And they converted all of that into rubles and kopecks. So this is the amount of money that a typical family needs to survive, for example. From there on, they will say, listen, okay, all the resources belong to everybody. We're going to allocate resources in the economy to make sure that we've got X million numbers of individuals. They need so many resources. We convert that into rubles into kopecks, and therefore the salary for a typical worker will be X. Because with that X salary, kopecks and rubles and kopecks, you can buy so much oil, or rather so much bread and milk and whatever you need, and by doing that, you can scientifically exactly calculate what the requirements of individuals are, how you have to allocate resources in order to produce that, to make sure that your population can survive. The thing is with this system, it is crucial to keep prices constant, to fix all prices. Because if a price changes somewhere, the whole system collapses. Yes. Everything is based on the original allocation starting from the bottom. And that's why in the Soviet Union, the communist systems that we had previously, everything was very, very cheap. So bread and milk and cheese and everything was very, very cheap. The problem is you couldn't always get it. And that's why if you think of a communist system, you think of queues. People standing in queues waiting to get stuff.
And black markets.
And black markets inevitably happen as well.
Yes.
So what happened? Why is this that the system didn't work? And there are many reasons for that. But the most important reason is that, remember, the Soviet system consisted of a system of committees. You start off at the bottom, a committee at the house, in your household or your neighborhood or whatever, and from there it builds up until you get to the Politburo, and you get whoever's in charge of the Politburo. But it's a system of committees. And I can tell you, and eventually you get to committees consisting of economists, and they are nobody as dangerous as a bunch of economists. I promise you that. So all these economists will allocate resources all the way up. Yes. And the politicians then, instead of having the power at the bottom, at the Soviet, what happened in practice is that the power becomes centralized. And so the guy on top, he will decide, listen, for us it's important to have rockets and to have an army and to have this and that and the other. And so that is where we're going to allocate resources. And for the rest, we're going to allocate it to the rest of the society. The problem with all of this is, and this is the main question, and the difference between a free system and a communist system is the question, what are you going to make? Let me give you a simple example. You've got a factory with manufacturing shoes. So the question is, what is the color of the shoes going to be? In a free system, you know what it is because you try. You make blue ones, people buy blue shoes or they don't, and then let's try something else. In a centrally controlled system, somebody decides we're going to manufacture black shoes. That's it. And that's why in the Soviet Union, you had only black shoes and grey clothes and this and that and the other because it couldn't change. You can't change that because that's going to disrupt the whole system. So the allocation process, committees decided we're going to allocate so much and that they are going to produce so much and so on and so on. And that's all. There are many problems with that. First of all, deciding how much resources a factory gets means that you must know exactly what they're going to produce, which is actually possible to do. You can calculate that. But you do not know exactly whether people would want those products or not in the end. And that's why in the Soviet Union it was characterized by a shortage of things, but often it was characterized by surpluses of things as well. Like, for example, there's a city called Tomsk where they produce titanium, and at one stage they have over-allocated resources to a titanium factory, and they had the surplus of titanium, and people started using titanium to fix their houses. Yes. A very, very expensive metal. Yeah. You always have surpluses and shortages of whatever. Then you have an additional problem, and that's corruption. Because people know that there's a shortage about everything. If you want something, you have to bribe somebody somewhere. And that leads to a huge wastage of the system as well, actually exacerbating this process, this allocation, or this shortage problem that you have in that specific system. Let me just compare it to the free system. Sure. In a free system that I prefer, the benefit of a free system is we keep on trying stuff. And if it doesn't work, we try something else. Yeah. So we never get to an answer. There's always trying, what's the price of this? I don't know. Let's figure out. It's a dynamic system. And it keeps on changing. And that's the benefit of that. So the allocation process is never optimal, but at least it keeps on changing. Let me just make a last comment about AI. So in a scientific communist system, it's based on plans. But now with artificial intelligence, quite ironically, it will be more possible to allocate resources better in a communist system. So and I'm very much against that, don't misunderstand me. I'm just pointing out the irony here. In a modern economy, it could be more possible to have
very interesting that you should
scientific
say that.
communism. Yeah.
Because a lot of political philosophers, elite political philosophers, if you want to call them that, often say that the problem with communism is that it wasn't tried properly. Communism wasn't, it failed because its form wasn't correct, and that we are going to improve communism and we'll make it work the next time around, which is interesting because with the possibility of AI, which I've never thought about, maybe the mathematical and computational power, if you took a quantum computer, for example, and plugged it into communism 101, maybe it would solve all
but remember, if next time when you talk to people still believing in this completely ridiculous ideology, you just ask them this question: how do you know what to make? Just ask them that. How do you know what color shoes to make?
Yeah.
Because you don't know. Because it keeps on changing all the time. Look at fashion. It just keeps on changing all the time. And all sort of things change.
In the South African context, I see a slow drift towards this centralization in line with, as Anthea what Jeffries points out, the ANC had its outward facade, which was please donate to us, free market capitalists, but within their ranks, they were slowly drifting towards, their own ideological beliefs about the world, which were largely Marxist. And I've seen a slow drift towards the centralization over the last, sort of 20, 30 years, especially in the last couple of years, while the ANC has been squirming a little bit. For me, NHI, heavy centralization, obviously. Bella, heavier centralization.
Exactly.
EWC, centralization. Even this water rights thing, where they're trying to allocate which farmers get which amount of water. I mean, they're trying to centrally control
resources,
water. I mean, it's
exactly that. Yeah, well, on ANC, just ask about the ideology of the ANC. I don't think the ANC's got an ideology, by the way. But very few of them are really ideologues. There were a few.
Elbow patches and tweed jackets.
There were a few. Like Pravin Gordhan, he was a real communist. I mean, he was. And there are a couple of other ones that are real communists out there. But for many of them are simply there for the right.
100%.
But let's analyze this whole thing.
Okay.
So nominally, the ANC is, we can call them socialists, we can call them communists, we can call them believe in centrally controlled, developmentalists, whatever. You can pick a name somewhere, but it comes down to they are heavily influenced by the communist ideologies of the 90s. They're Leninists in a way. I mean, they even have the Communist Party as part of the tripod. Yeah. They even call one another silly names like Comrade. I mean, the last time I called somebody Comrade.
The Communist Party now seems to have a little bit of honeymoon troubles.
Yeah. But, okay, so the ideology is rooted somewhere in the 1920s. From that flow, policies that fits with that. And the policies are things like you've mentioned, expropriation, Bella even, NHI, that sort of stuff. And centralization of things. They want to centralize things because they know better. They know how to allocate resources much better than you and I, or the people in a country. Because that's a free system, allocates freely, allocate resources freely. So, wrong policy, outdated. A wrong ideology, outdated. The policies flown, but there are two additional things that the ANC stand for as well. And the third one that characterizes the ANC is cadre deployment. And there's another name for cadre deployment. It's called incompetence. Because you employ people because they're loyal to the party, very much the same as what happened in the Soviet Union. They're loyal to the party, not because they can do the job. And the last thing about the ANC quite often is that they stand for corruption. Yeah. And I can give you the list. Now, if you put those four things together, see what happened to South Africa. Now, I can give you all the numbers, local authorities, the state-owned enterprises, the national accounts, everything, that economic growth in the end, what happened resulted in unemployment and poverty and children dying of hunger because of an incompetent, destructive ANC for many, many years.
Yeah, we're down to 30 children a day dying of starvation in South Africa. 27.2% or something like that was the figure given for children that are permanently stunted in their growth. And then obviously if you're stunted in growth, your cognitive development
of course
delayed. And for me, that's the ANC legacy. Now, I don't want to get too much into just harassing the ANC today. But for me, that's now part of their legacy. They had the early liberation legacy, and we can argue about how great or bad some of those guys were, but their legacy now is as much liberation as it is starving children. As we're talking about resource allocation, I wonder if it's not possible that South Africa is getting down to the point where we kind of don't have a choice anymore with resource allocation. Has South Africa started to enter the very early stages of an irretrievable debt spiral?
Are you talking about, when you talk about debt, what do you mean debt? Who's debt?
I'm talking about actually debt in South Africa across the board. So I'm talking about national debt, but I'm talking about debt that goes all the way down to the household level, where you have households that are living now month to month on borrowed money. So I'm talking about the accumulation of debt in South Africa. So obviously at the national level, we understand that South Africa is very resource constrained. There just isn't enough money to get around to fix all the schools and all the hospitals and all the roads, and to go and prosecute all the crooked and corrupt cadres and all that stuff. But the debt is so deeply entrenched now that the government can't even, for example, start taxating more to get out of the debt spiral.
I would look at it differently. I won't call it a debt problem. I will simply call it a lack of economic growth problem. That's in a way the other side of the same coin. Because, people are in debt, but if you look at it at the specific numbers, it's not really that big an issue. The problem is that the income side of the equation is just not keeping up. Yep. And that means the economic growth side of the equation is just not keeping up. Same if you look at, for example, the national debt, the debt of the Minister of Finance, or state debt, or government. They call it government debt. It's not government, it's state debt. If government goes away, they're not going to take the debt with them. It's still our debt. And just by the way, that number is in excess of 100,000 rand for every individual in a country. That's a debt that the Minister of Finance accumulated on your and my behalf. So the problem with that debt, and I can give you all the sort of numbers, is that the economy is just not strong enough to carry that. So in the end, it's an economic growth problem. It's not really a debt problem as such. Yes. We can see that in terms of debt to GDP ratios and that sort of stuff, but the main problem has to do with economic growth. So we can argue, and we can debate, we can talk about why it is that the economy is not growing, and I think I've got a long list on that.
What are the biggest handbrakes on the economy? For me, obviously we know BEE is an enormous handbrake.
That is a major one. Well, there's one. There's only one. I can give you a long list as an economist. We have to do this and we can do that and blah, 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 and it's not difficult to figure that out. But there's one obstacle. There's only one obstacle, and if we don't fix that, we're not going to fix this economy, and that is called DANC. They're not going to change. I mean, listen to Cyril Ramaphosa talking about the wonderful things that happened in agriculture in Zim, for example. I mean, you can't argue with those guys. And we fixed our politics before, and I believe we're going to do it again.
I firmly believe that. I think that the ANC is going to something like 20% in the local government.
We've got to get rid of them. Yeah. That is the only answer. But after we've done that, there are a lot of other things that we need to do. And perhaps I can just give you an example of what I would start off with. And like I've said, I can tell you, we have to reform the tax system, we have to make it more efficient, we have to employ people. Blah, blah. That's I can give you lots of things, and we can talk about that as well. But the first thing that I would start off with is just to clean up the place. I promise you. Yeah. That's what I would start off. Imagine we've got a president saying that this place is dirty. It is. It's filthy, South Africa. Get up and say, listen, we're going to clean up the place. We're proud South Africans. We want a clean environment where we can build the future. Just that is the first starting point. You do something that's positive, and everybody's going to buy in there. And by the way, this has been tried before. It has been tried in New York with the broken window, the project that they had there. That is currently being tried in Rwanda with huge success. Just clean the place up. And then from there on, you have to do all sort of things to grow the economy. And I've got the secret formula if you're interested in that.
I'll talk about the economists that have secret formulas for reviving South Africa's economy. In general, there's kind of like consensus on the main things to do. And yet the government pretends like it's this like big like myth. The ANC goes around pretending that growing an economy and making people wealthier is this like big mystery. And yet when you speak to people like you, people that are actually in the know, it's amazing to me how simple the answers are, and yet we can't push them through in Parliament.
The ANC, like I've said, you can't reform them. You've got to get rid of them. But the ideology is an ideology where people are exploited all the time. And business is always bad, and capital is always bad, because they will always exploit people. That is what they believe in.
Yes.
They are bad people. You must keep a lid on economic activity. You must always contain these guys, because they are bad. That is the starting point of the ANC ideologically.
Yes.
Prevent exploitation, manage everything, because I know better. I know better than people out there, but of course that's a lie. That's not really what they're there for. Many of them are there simply to line their own pockets. So that is actually why they're there for. Because being in government is a very powerful position. I mean, you can get all these contracts that you can award, and you can overpay yourself, and you can take bonuses and all that sort of stuff. But they just wrong. The starting point is wrong.
It's an extraction network, and it's an amazingly sophisticated
it is. That's all it is.
Extraction network. And I'm not a conspiracy theory like you. I'm a kind of data-driven guy, but I think we haven't seen the peaks of the Southern African extraction network. I don't want to get into this too much, but I personally believe that we've got politicians in South Africa, high-ranking guys maybe like Ramaphosa, maybe like Masatile, that are in bed with syndicates in other countries, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and that there's a Southern African, for example, multinational gold extraction network that's going on with cigarette smugglers, and I'm just waiting for that kind of thing to crack. But for now, let's just see what's happening with these dockets, with these political killing
committee.
The ANC's created a class of oligarchs in South Africa. And I was just wondering how significant, I mean, you've got 100 odd people, according to William Gumede, they've got R1 trillion or something. I haven't heard of 98 of these 100 guys. I've basically heard of Ramaphosa and Patrice Motsepe. I don't know who the other 98 of these guys are. How significant is their impact on South Africa's economy and socio-political landscape, given that I haven't heard of 98 out of 100 of these billionaire oligarchs?
Can I, let me just come back just for a moment to the issue about the resource allocation in the economy. Let me just repeat that, because that's crucially important. And this is theory. This is economics 101 theory, but in practice, this is actually how it works. You have, as a firm, you have so many things that you can put into the equation, and you're trying to get so much out of the equation. And as an economics student, you guys will all know about this. It's supply and demand stuff, and you're trying to marginal utilities and that sort of things. So it's a cutthroat business, because there are a lot of other people competing with you in this system as well. So if you want to survive in a free system, it's a process of continuous competition and reallocation of resources, and you have to apply your mind all the time. Yeah, you must be driven to survive financially. Of course, in practice, there are all sort of safety nets and stuff like that, but that at least is the theory, and that's how it works practically. If you put some sort of additional cost on any company or any firm, and some sort of obstacle in that, then they automatically they're behind their competitors.
Yes.
And remember, the world today is a global village. We compete internationally with everybody else. So the obstacles that you can put in the way of a company that's running flat out as it is, to stay ahead of the pack, or at least to stay with the pack, are obstacles like, for example, an environment that is not friendly to business, for example, not having a pavement, not having electricity, not having water, paying too much taxes, having to bribe somebody somewhere, or putting all sort of requirements that you have to pay so much for this, minimum wages for that, you have to register. All those things are obstacles, are making life difficult for business. And the moment you put that additional in a business that is already doing as best as they possibly can, it puts them a little bit behind.
Yes.
And put all of that together in one economy, it's going to put your whole economy slow your whole economic growth down. And eventually, over time, what's going to happen, your economy the other guys will start catching up with us.
Yes.
And eventually,
Which has happened.
Yeah. I've got all the numbers. I can show that. And what's going to happen, people are going to get unemployed, which is, by the way, the most important resource, and that's labor. So we're not using our most important resource because we can't. It's just so difficult in this very hostile environment, and that leads to unemployment levels, leads to poverty, it's leading kids dying of hunger, for example. And it is because of the interference, and it is because of all these obstacles and additional obstacles that is put in the place of business by government. They think they're doing well.
Yes.
Like, for example, let's look at the minimum wages. At least you have to pay people X, because below that you can't survive. The reality is, in South Africa, minimum wages is actually zero. That's the real minimum wage, because that's what people get if you don't have a job. Zero.
I agree. And most people working in the informal economy are not even earning minimum wage anyway. And the informal economy, they're not getting minimum wage anyway. And the informal economy is an enormous part of South Africa's economy.
Yeah, probably much bigger than what most people realize.
I think it's certainly way bigger than the government or the ANC in particular would like to admit. But essentially what you've been talking about now giving all this red tape and unnecessary obstacles for businesses to thrive, having to deal with the unions, having to deal with minimum wage. I mean, just the amount of times you've got to go online to the...
it's cost.
And you've got to type in...
It's cost. It's resources. It's money.
All of this means globally we're less competitive as a country. I like to use the analogy of a soccer team that the 11th guy in Manchester United is probably a better soccer player than the best guy in Kaizer Chiefs. If we can be completely honest, Orlando Pirates. I don't want to get hate.
You're going to get in trouble now.
People are going to be upset. And that's the problem with South Africa. We're so uncompetitive that even the very best businesses in South Africa globally are now at enormous disadvantage.
There's an interesting point there. I want to make 2 points. The first one is that the best businesses, many of South African businesses are very well. I mean, imagine surviving in a very hostile environment. The guys said, good, let's not make a mistake. But many of South African businesses are actually international businesses. The guys listed on the JSE, the bulk of their revenue get abroad, not in South Africa. If you look at the international businesses, there are a long list of them actually selling their assets in South Africa. And if they do want, there are a few investors, like for example, Tata is coming to South Africa, but there are a lot of businesses that actually divested from South Africa. Yes. But the international guys that do invest in South Africa like to invest in our capital market or in financial instruments or in the JSE or whatever. They do not like to invest in building new factories, which is unfortunate. That's what we want, and that's what we need. I just want to make another comment about the nature of economies. Economies are changing, and today, and this doesn't fit in with the communists, because their mindset is workers working in factories, working in mines, working on farms. That's where they come. That's not where economic activity is happening today. Economic activity happens in the tertiary economy. It happens in the service industry. And the service industry is completely different from what Karl Marx had in mind.
Yes.
So the labor value theory of Karl Marx simply doesn't work in a modern economy because things are service-driven.
The idea of intellectual economics or intellectual property in and of itself undermines the labor theory of...
Completely. So Marxism simply doesn't work in a modern economy. Something else, and this is a little bit technical, if you look at the typical factory, a business, they will invest, they will accumulate capital, build a new factory, for example, and you will depreciate that factory over time, whatever, and put it in your financial statements. But the real economic growth is happening in places like, for example, Microsoft and those big companies, the service-driven companies typically, and they invest in software.
Yes.
And software, you do not depreciate it over time. You write it off straight away because it is an expense. Software
is like a robot.
But once you've invested in software, once you've written a piece of software, whatever, you can just keep on getting money out of it, make money, keep on making money out of it, and it doesn't depreciate in value because software is software.
Yes.
So that's a big difference between Karl Marx and the modern economy. Modern economy is service-orientated.
In fact, now with AI, software could compound in its value going future in the future as it becomes more intelligent and is able to think more on its own. I don't want to get into AI.
So think about the communists. So a Microsoft program, a window program, that's actually capital. So that's the resource. Now, as a communist, how are you going to allocate that? I mean, it doesn't fit in a communist ideology. It just doesn't work.
I don't want to change. I haven't used the word segue yet today. I overused that word. It's my first time. So I don't want to make a rapid departure from that, but we're running out of time. And this is a question that I really want to get around to. So I'm sorry to just shift like that. We have very few taxpayers left in South Africa. It's becoming an extreme concern for a lot of people. We've just absolutely hammered the tax base. Left, right, and center. We're down to 6 or 7 million people, and really only half of those 6 or 7 million people pay the bulk of the tax. Have we gotten down to the point of diminishing returns with the tax base?
Yeah, it's called the Laffer curve.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, there are 3 major taxes available. There are more than 100 taxes, by the way. I'm talking about national level. But there are 3 major ones. The most important one is personal income taxes. It's about 40% of total revenue to the Minister of Finance. And there are very, very few individuals that pay just about all the personal income taxes. And you can't increase personal income taxes more, because the moment you do that, people aggressively start evading taxes.
And we're there now.
We're over that.
Okay, we're over. Okay.
So you can't. I mean, we've already passed that point some years ago.
Okay.
So any increase in personal income taxes will result in less taxes, not more. Less taxes. I'm an asset manager. I look after people's money. They walk into my office. They say, tell me 2 things. I want to take my money out of the country, and I don't want to pay tax. Those are the 2 things they tell me. So personal income taxes cannot be increased. The second most important tax, let me go to the third one first, and it's company taxes. Companies don't pay taxes, by the way. They always shift the total tax down onto the individual. Individuals pay all the taxes in the end. But company taxes, tax base is extremely narrow. There are 1,000 companies that pay 75% of all company taxes. 1,000 companies.
Wow.
There's no way you can increase company taxes. Currently 26-27% in South Africa, while globally company taxes are coming down. We need to reduce our company taxes, not increases. You increase that, you're going to lose those taxpayers. The second most important one, and that's a potential tax that we can increase, is VAT. Although we're getting close to the point where you can't increase VAT anymore. But VAT is a regressive tax. So it means the base is much broader.
Yes.
It's about 30% of total.
It impacts the poor more.
But indirectly, it's a so-called regressive tax. So politically, that's extremely difficult. See what happened at the beginning of this year with an attempt. But that's the only tax that can realistically be increased. But politically, that's a no-go. So the bottom line is, there are a couple of rats and mice that we can increase, a few levy or things like that. But it's not going to contribute much to the total. The only thing to increase the revenue for the state is to grow the economy. And policies that we have in place is not going to lead to economic growth.
There's an economics of harm that's associated to VAT, in my opinion. If you have a country where you have 30 odd children starving to death a day, and you increase VAT, there's literally a death elasticity to that. You could almost put a number on it. You could say, okay, 1 more child's going to starve to death now, because somewhere out there's going to be a household that's going to fall just below that income margin. And if that
No, I disagree with you.
You don't agree?
No. Let me tell you why. For a number of reasons. First of all, what I think what you would like to see is more zero-rated foodstuffs, for example. Is that what you would like to see?
I think that would be a brilliant idea. The stuff that they did add to the zero-rated list in this last round was stuff that households don't eat.
No, that's not a good idea for a number of reasons. Do not. In fact, there should only be 2 VAT rates, whatever it is, and 0. And 0 is for stuff that you export. So there can be a 0 on exports. But for the rest, no. You tax everything equally. And again, there's a reason behind it. That has to do with the allocation of resources. The moment you start twiggling around with prices, you undermine the resources, the allocation of resources in the economy. So if you have differentiated VAT rates, it opens the door for corruption, misallocation of resources, all sort of things. So no zero-rated stuff. It doesn't mean you don't need to help the poor.
Yes.
But you can do, if you really want to assist the poor, rather do it on the expenditure side of the budget, not on the revenue side.
So
Don't
increase.
if you want to. So don't give them a break on taxes. Taxes must be there, no exceptions on tax. Right across the board, everything taxed exactly the same. But if you do want to help the poor, do it in expenditures.
Increase grants, for example.
Okay. Increase grants.
That's interesting.
And there are many additional reasons. Remember, an expense is something that you have to reconsider every year. So is it still applicable? Should we still do that? Should we increase it? Whatever. So there are many, and at least you can see how much you spend on the poor. If you're giving them a break on the VAT, you can't see how much you spend on the poor indirectly, because the rich people also get the benefits from a lower VAT, for example. So no
That's
exceptions, nothing. Your tax system must be as neutral. That's a term that economists use. Do not interfere with the price mechanism whatsoever. I have to make sure that you have a neutral tax system, and a differentiated tax on VAT, for example, undermines that.
That's a fantastic perspective on that. Because the government has been on about the zero-rated food basket item, and they made it a very big political talking,
of course, but it's politicians.
Point.
They're trying to. Politicians lie to us all the time. All of them, by the way. Let me just make another point about VAT. And there's a lot of research been done on this. So we zero rate something, for example. Paraffin. There was a research on paraffin. Paraffin is zero rated. So a bunch of guys went and said, listen, okay, now it's zero rated. Are the actual consumer in the end getting the benefit from that? The answer is no, because the retailers simply increase their prices. So it doesn't work anyway. Or some other stuff, like, for example, certain things, like basic things like bread. Rich people eat a lot of bread. Do you know that? And people are campaigning for other things to be zero rated as well. But sometimes people, quite often rich people, get some of these zero rated stuff and they feed their dogs with that. So what you're doing, you're giving a tax break for rich people to feed their dogs. Don't do that. Across the board, exactly the same, and only give them a break or give them assistance on the expenditure side of the budget.
Yeah, the other side of that has been the push for a wealth tax, where they want to start going after the.
We have wealth taxes.
Yeah, but even more aggressive than now. I think it's a bad idea.
It's a horrible idea.
Yeah,
it's an absolutely horrible idea. Remember, what is a wealth tax? Well, there are many different kinds of taxes. You can categorize taxes in various different things: direct, indirect, consumption taxes, expenditure taxes, or whatever. But there are also two categories of taxes. The one is taxes on revenue, on whatever so the state shares in whatever you earn, your salary, for example, or a tax on capital. So, and the difference between the two is that the state shares in the fruit of the tree, or the state cuts off a branch of the tree. That's the difference between the two, basically. You can compare it to a fruit tree. Are the state going to take some of the fruit, or is the state going to cut off the wood in itself? Which is already a bad idea. You don't want to cut off a branch of the tree, because then next year it's going to be less fruit, for example. And that's what capital taxes are.
The way I see it is that if we increase our aggression on the wealth tax, you chase away the people that invest in capital-making machines, i.e. businesses.
Well, it's an immoral tax at various levels, because people accumulate capital after they have been taxed already.
Yes.
Secondly, in the case of capital gains tax in South Africa, for example, our capital gains in South Africa is actually a tax on inflation, because you are taxed on your nominal appreciation of capital.
Yes.
Not on the real, on a nominal appreciation. And the reason why we have a lot of inflation in South Africa, currently it's relatively low, is exactly because of the state. Because of ridiculous increases in local authorities and Eskom, and even the Minister of Finance is budgeting for state expenditure increasing by well in excess of inflation over the next couple of years. So it's a tax on inflation. It's immoral.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that these are things that, again, it just further puts a handbrake on the economy. Even if it's not the biggest handbrake, it accumulates and it accumulates and it accumulates. We are going to talk about South Africa's Reserve Bank, which I think is in a fairly unique situation. Having said that, I'm obviously not very well informed, so let's talk to the big guy.
Okay, it's very interesting to see how central banks evolved over time. The oldest central bank in the world is the Riksbank in Sweden. followed by the Bank of England, is the second oldest, and there are a couple of other ones as well. And typically in the past, central banks were under control of politicians in one way or the other.
Yes.
Like, for example, if you look at these gold coins that was minted by kings and Tsars and all sort of rulers in the past, they had their own face on that. That was legal tender. You have to have the Kaiser's face on a coin before, because without Kaiser's head on the face on the coin, it's not legal tender. And that's how they made the money. It's called signage. So the ruler will typically put a little bit of a lead in it or chip off the sides of the coin or whatever. And that's how they made their money, the kings and rulers of the past. But gradually it evolved over time, money evolved over time, and it's just fascinating to see how money evolved over time. But today, central banks are still under control of the authorities, but they, in most cases, not in all cases, but they are independent as far as policy is concerned. So monetary policy is set independently in most cases from the politicians, but it kind of belongs to the state in most cases. In the case of South Africa, and that's what I think what you're referring to, the South African Reserve Bank actually belongs to shareholders.
Yes.
And I just want to, for transparency, I'm a shareholder in the South African Reserve Bank. I've got 200 shares in the South African Reserve Bank, and I can vote for half of the directors on the board of the South African Reserve Bank, but the other half of the directors and the governor and the deputy governors are appointed by the state president. So I have no say over the appointment of the other half of the directors and the governors at the South African Reserve Bank. And I have absolutely no say over monetary policy as a shareholder. And I have no claim on the reserves at the South African Reserve Bank. Those reserves belong to the state, to the people, the country, if you like. And the dividend that I get on my 200 shares is approximately 8 rand or so per year. The reason why I have shares in the South African Reserve Bank is because I get invited to the general annual meeting, and they usually share or service with nice wine and biltong. So that's a benefit. But I also get some documents as an economist.
On the
but
inside.
it's documents that are of public knowledge anyway, and so on. So that's a bit of a history why the South African Reserve Bank is still privately owned, because what happened in the past, there were a lot of banks typically, and one bank will get the exclusive right to issue currency, and then that bank will typically become the central bank in that country, and in most cases central banks belong to the state. But South Africa is a bit of an exception, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter really that it belongs to the private sector. So from that point of view, it is independent as far as policy is concerned. It is entrenched in the constitution, and the monetary policy, and that means interest rates and stuff like that, is set by the South African Reserve Bank. It belongs to private sector, to private shareholders, but it doesn't really matter. It's pretty much the same as most other central banks.
Now, we've got one or two people in South Africa. They often tend to be kind of radical, like Julius Malema, and he's always calling for the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. Most financiers, economists, and most people in general feel that it's not necessary to nationalize the Reserve Bank, and in fact, there might be more harm than good in doing so. What is your feeling on that?
Well, let me just repeat this. Monetary policy, the Reserve Bank is independent as far as monetary policy
is concerned.
And that's based on the Constitution. The ownership of the Reserve Bank doesn't change that. So if we change the ownership and we nationalize the Reserve Bank, nothing is going to change. But there's one very important thing. If we nationalize the Reserve Bank, we're going to send a signal to the market. So you've nationalized the Reserve Bank.
Centralization.
Nothing is going to change, but why do it?
Yes.
Is the next step then to prescribe to the Reserve Bank how to set monetary policy? And that's what the market is going to ask. What's next? So you've nationalized it, nothing's changed, like I've just described, but why do it then?
Yes.
What's the next step? And there are many examples. Politicians, the reason why the independence of the Reserve Bank is entrenched, why it's written in the Constitution, is because we do not want politicians to interfere at the Reserve Bank. Because if they do, they mess up. That's what Donald Trump is doing in the moment in the US, by the way. Look at where inflation is in Turkey. because their president, Erdogan, he forces certain monetary policy on their central banks, and the result of that is what happened to their currency. They've gone, see what happened to the central bank and money in Zimbabwe because of political interference. We don't want politicians close to the central bank.
I don't. In fact, I don't want politicians close to, if I can be honest,
most
any
things.
banks.
Most things.
I think, I mean, look, we obviously know that our political elite, with the history of state-owned enterprises, they have a 100% track record of running working businesses into the ground, working assets into the ground.
And the South African Reserve Bank is under excellent management. Really, I can tell you that. They're doing a brilliant job.
I think it's been one of the most profound institutions in South Africa's post-apartheid era, one of the most robust and I would say morally and ethically upstanding institutions, them along with free media to some extent, and a couple of other institutions has really been the backbone of South Africa's democracy.
I used to work at the Reserve Bank. I cut my teeth as a young economist at the Reserve Bank, analyzed fiscal accounts like what we spoke about earlier. And that was a really, very good time. It really provided me with a very, very solid base. In my job, there was as a fiscal analyst, fiscal economist, and also because working at the Reserve Bank, I got a very nice basis for monetary policy as well. So
I believe that the privatized banking sector was one of the things that really helped keep away state capture. Anywhere where there was a bank that was state was captured by the state, like VBS, for example.
For instance, I've got one problem with the banking system. So let me criticize the Reserve Bank. I've only got good things to say about the Reserve Bank. But but I've got one bad thing about the Reserve Bank, and that is that they over-control the banking system. I would like to see more banks going bankrupt.
Okay.
Really, I do. In fact, I would like to see more businesses going bankrupt. It's a good thing for a business to go bankrupt. But the banks in South Africa, they are very well capitalized. They are very liquid. They are under very strict control of the South African Reserve Bank. Nothing's going to go wrong with our banking system in South Africa. And that's not good. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it also makes it quite expensive. Our banking system is quite expensive.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So and because it's basically an oligopoly. Few big guys.
There's 5 or 6 big players and they hold the whole market.
And that's the whole thing, and that's the bad part about this. So what I would like to see, I would like to see more banks going bankrupt, because the responsibility must be with you and me to pick banks that are financially solid. And at the moment, we pick banks because we know the Reserve Bank is doing this job for us. And that's not a good thing. It must be our responsibility to shop around and make sure I put my money at the bank that I believe is well managed, not because the Reserve Bank tells me that. And the same goes for any business. If I do business with anybody else, it's my job to make sure that it's a solid business that I'm doing business with, a solid company that I'm doing business with. And coming back to the ideology of a free market system. A free market system is a system where we continuously try new stuff and new things, create new things, but it also means that we have to continuously get rid of bad things. It's a process of creation and destruction.
Agreed.
And that is the vibrancy. That's the energy of a free market system. And the same goes for banks. So, of course, I don't want banks to go bankrupt, and I don't want businesses to go bankrupt, but I want the badly run the ones to go bankrupt. So we can take that capital and give somebody else an opportunity to use this capital, because capital is scarce. But we have to create an environment where we can continuously create new businesses as well.
Without the churn, you limit innovation, you limit the next guy coming up.
And that's why I'm so much against this business practitioners that try to revive and keep zombie companies alive. Get rid of those zombie companies and make it easier for newer companies to be created as well.
I think in South Africa we've had an unbelievably devastating effect of running zombie companies. SA Airways zombie company, Post Office is a zombie company.
Those are state-owned enterprises, and they're all zombie companies.
State-owned zombie.
We call them parasitals.
That's one of the best terms I've heard to date. I'm gonna keep that. I'll tell people it was my term as well. There's no copyright on that, doggy. I'd also like to talk about municipalities in South Africa. It's quite a difficult thing for a lot of people to understand. Even for a person in my position, it's difficult to understand. We have municipalities that are so heavily in debt, they've been so badly managed that they owe Eskom like $1 billion. You get one municipality owes Eskom like 500 million or R1 billion. And
let me give you some numbers. Well, let's just give you the background to municipalities. Municipalities are the most important authority out there.
Yes, that's where the service delivery happens.
That's your first port of call. They give you water and electricity and a pavement, and they're supposed to give you those sort of things. And that's where businesses operate, in municipalities. If you don't get that, then you can't have an economy. Now, more than 70% of the local authorities in South Africa got qualified audits. They are badly run, as a rule. And there's a huge difference between the ANC-run local authorities and the DA-run.
Yes.
And I'm not a great fan of the DA, just by the way.
Me neither.
But the reality is the DA is doing a much better job on the local authorities. Not everywhere, but as a rule, they're much better than the ANC. So they are mismanaged. They've been run into the ground financially and operationally, and you can't do business there. They implode, or in the case of Johannesburg, it explodes. The outstanding debt of the local authorities is in excess of 100 billion rand only to Eskom. Wow. And remember who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, it's you and I.
The Minister of Finance is civilian. They're going to knock it on his door and say, listen, I want more money. And they have been getting money. So they're going to ask for more money going forward. So actually, the debt of the local authorities is actually Minister of Finance's debt as well. You have to add it to that big pile of debt already existing there. So the local authorities are a mess. We need to fix that. And I'm afraid, looking at how things deteriorating, keep on deteriorating. See, I mentioned earlier that the first place to start is to clean up the place. Yes. And that's the job of the local authorities. They're making a mess of this. Here and there, I must say, there are signs that some of them are improving a little bit. But I'm afraid, yes, the damage that's been done on the local authority level was absolutely horrible.
Somebody said that to me the other day. They said that they're starting to see a turnaround in some of the municipalities. Like, for example, in Johannesburg, what I'm seeing is a slowing of the rate of decay, is how I call it. But they're not actually getting ahead of
No, they're not. No, they're not. But they are, even in some of the state-owned enterprises like Transnet, there's signs of slight improvement there. I think it's a new CEO there. She's doing a good job. And even at Eskom, there seems to be a bit of an improvement, or it's a bit of a slowdown in the collapse. Yeah.
I think that there's a combination of small improvements in some of these institutions, and then a whole lot of propaganda that goes on with it, like with Kgosi Ensorama. He did fairly well in the beginning, but what happens now is we know from the data and the finances that they're burning through diesel at a rate of knots to keep the lights on, and they don't always reflect the nasty truth behind the scenes.
And I think the whole system in electricity in South Africa is wrong, because we've got Eskom and we've got NASA. Those are the two big problems.
Yeah.
That's the problem. NASA is part of the problem, because, I mean, they just made this huge calculation error on what electricity prices should have been increased at. And they don't know what the price of electricity should be. They pretend to know.
Yeah.
Because they make a determination. They tell Eskom increase it by X%, as if they know what the price of electricity is. And we've been talking about prices all the time this morning. They don't know what the price of electricity should be. The price of anything is what somebody is prepared to pay for that.
Yes.
And Eskom is losing customers. And they're losing paying customers. And the unpaying guys that don't pay, the guys that steal electricity, they remain. So we need to get rid of NASA. And there are many other institutions that will get rid of the Competition Commission as well. That's a bunch of, my goodness.
I, funny enough, you won't believe, I was one of the very, very first victims of the Competition Commission. I was in my early 20s, a complete idiot, running a bicycle shop of all things. And we got together in a room because the industry was collapsing. There were hundreds of jobs that were going to be cut. And a bunch of captains of industry called a meeting, and they called us into a room, and we all went to a meeting. I'm telling you, there were guys there like big indunas there, like the owner of Cycle Lab was there. I won't mention his name, back in the day, a well-known South African. And all we were there to do was to discuss how we could save the industry. Shops were literally going down left, right, and center. and all of us got clapped by the Competition Commission. So we were
Because you were colluding.
Yeah, because we were colluding.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, none of us had even spoke about prices or margins or anything. It was literally about, but we were so naive, we didn't even understand what was going on.
It's a destructive organization, the Competition Commission. One of the best things for any industry, for any economy, is for an industry to make a lot of money. Even if you were colluding on prices and you were making all this money, you're going to buy a new Porsche and you're going to buy a new TV or whatever the case may be. And other people are going to see, but there's a lot of money to be made in this specific. And there will be more bicycle shops.
They just overstepped their mandate.
I mean, come on, what a destructive organization. Got to close them down as well, and NASA. Those are the two.
They just go around doing what they want. You've given us a lot of time, and we really appreciate it. We've come down now to the end of the interview, and I was wondering if there's any one last thing that you haven't gotten around to saying that you would like to say, especially...
Let me give you the secret of economic growth. How's that?
Please, that would be fantastic.
The secret formula.
Please do.
And you don't need a degree in economics. In fact, preferably you shouldn't have a degree in economics. There are three things that you need to grow an economy. The first thing is you must protect private property rights.
Yes.
And with that, I mean a very broad definition. Not only my stuff, my property, but also my right to my life, my right on my freedom of movement, individual freedom, including the jealous protection of private property rights. Private property rights must be protected at all cost. It's crucially important. The second thing is that you need is that, and let me interrupt myself for a moment. There's a saying that there is no free lunch, which is not true. There is one free lunch, and that free lunch is free trade. Because think about that for a moment. If there's a transaction happening between you and me, I will gain from this transaction and you will gain from this transaction. Otherwise, the transaction would not have happened. So after the transaction, you and I are both better off.
Yes.
We have created a free lunch.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important to have free trade and to protect free trade and to encourage free trade, because it creates free lunches. It creates wealth out of nothing. And that's why it's important to protect private property rights, because if it doesn't belong to me, I can't trade in it. And if I can't trade in it, I can't create a free lunch.
Yeah.
The third thing is you must have sound money. Sound money means low inflation, because prices tell us what to produce and what to consume all the time. And if you can't see the signals, because all prices just keep on going up, that's what inflation is, you cannot allocate those scarce resources and your economy cannot grow optimally. Do those three things, and I promise you, your economy will grow.
Another fantastic economist who knows how to get an economy growing. Can we please get some people like this in our parliament? Dawie Roodt, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge. I will make sure, along with Ben, that this gets out to a whole bunch of people. You'll have a lot of influence on people that might not otherwise have an opportunity to see or hear from public intellectuals like yourself. And yeah, on behalf of everybody that's watching, thank you so much. I'm Aidan Brown. This is Dawie Roodt. We've got Ben Matjiu in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us, and bye for now.